Good afternoon, everybody. We are under some constraint of time, so we're going to try and be as brisk as possible and finish as soon as possible. So I would like to welcome everybody here today. Dr.Lebsang Sangay, Shri Ram Madhavji, Lalit Mansingji, Dr. M.L.Sondhi, distinguished members of the audience, members of the press. Thank you very much for coming here. I know there are enormous difficulties in traveling anywhere in Delhi. The traffic is dreadful and air is polluted. So I'm all the more honored that you've made the effort to come today for the third M.L.Sondhi Memorial Lecture. And this today also happens to be Professor Sondhi's 84th birthday. So both our main speakers have to catch planes and leave early. So what we have done is we have circulated detailed bios of the speakers, so I will not say too much about them, just a little bit. Dr. Lebsang Sangay, Harvard PhD, is the elected Sikyong or Chief Executive of the Central Tibetan Administration. And the CTA is not only a bureaucracy that administers Tibetan educational and welfare institutions in exile, but it also has an elected unicameral parliament. Which debates and scrutinizes government policies. This democratically elected assembly is the crowning political achievement of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the fruition of a long incremental pursuit of almost 50 years, till in 2015 he was able to hand over political power to an elected Kalon Tripo or Prime Minister, now known as the Sikyong or Chief Executive. Attempts at meaningful dialogue between the official and unofficial representatives of His Holiness and China have a checkered and fitful history, starting in the early 80s of the last century, resuming in the early 90s, and again in the early years of this century, till 2005, but they didn't really achieve too much. Presumably, they had the blessings of the Indian government. While at Harvard, Dr. Sangay also tried to provide more informal platforms for Tibetan Chinese and interested academics to exchange views, and Professor Sondhi and I were honored to attend one of these gatherings. In October of this year, the Tibetan Department of Information and International Relations at Dharamsala organized a conference of the 55 Forum with the declared aim of charting a 5-year plan for pursuing a return to dialogue and negotiations with China. If the dialogue, I quote, if the dialogue remains unachievable, the Tibetans will plan for another 50 years of resistance to China's occupation, systematic repression, and attempted cultural genocide in Tibet. Unquote. This undimmed resolve of Tibetans within and outside China, and the reminder from Doklam about unresolved Himalayan borders, remind us that at least from the Indian perspective, Tibet does indeed hold the key to Beijing. Furthermore, as Professor Sondhi wrote in an eponymously titled article in '92, there is simply no way in which India can ignore the strategic location of Tibet as the heart of Asia. As long as it remains the location for missile bases and for bombers and missiles targeted at Indian cities and cantonments, there can be no real agreement between the two biggest states of Asia. Unquote. Now, Shri Ram Madhavji, National General Secretary of the BJP and Director at the India Foundation, has had an abiding interest in national and foreign affairs. He is known to wear at least 3 hats of politician, journalist, and writer. His book, Uneasy Neighbors, India and China After 50 Years of War, published in 2014, provides a historical narration of events involving Tibet, India, and China from 1947 onwards, and shows how India gradually retreated from her initial stand inherited from the British, which included the Tibetan sovereignty Chinese suzerainty formula, itself the target of attack by reputed scholars of international law like Michael Walt von Prague, who criticized the imposition of Western categories with their distorting effect on a unique Asian institution. Later, India resiled even from her own position on the McMahon line by not challenging the self-styled Chinese basic principle of the unequal nature of past treaties. And today we are reduced to arguing over the LAC, the line of actual control. As Sri Ram Madhav points out, China, with her strong sense of superiority as a self-conceived middle kingdom, has nothing but contempt for India. But strangely enough, rather in the manner of a Hegelian counterfeit double, she treats India as a potential threat, working towards an elaborate policy of encirclement through her oceanic and Central Asian policies, not to mention her all-weather alliance with Pakistan. Sri Ram Madhavji emphasizes the need for India's leadership to understand Chinese master strategist Sun Tzu's teachings so as to adequately respond to China's tactics and maneuvers. Today, post the recent Doklam incident and post the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, we look forward to hearing his assessment of the current state of this triangular Tibet-India-China relationship. Sri Lalit Mansingh ji, former Foreign Secretary, had a very distinguished career in the Foreign Service, serving as ambassador in several of the world's important capitals. He didn't follow Professor Sondhi's example and resigned from the IFS. But post-retirement, he has been very active in the field of conflict management, a subject dear to M.L.Sondhi's heart, and we are very honored to have him on board as a trustee. He's also president of the Mahabodhi Society of India. To select a representative few out of his multitudinous achievements and activities is no easy task, and you will find more details in the circulated bio. Incidentally, despite himself having organized a major event on ASEAN yesterday, and despite coming here, he has to attend yet another function this afternoon, so he'll be leaving us a little early, a very busy and very creative person. Last but not least, may I introduce Trustee Dr. Lebsang, currently Research Manager, External Equities Department, ADIA, or Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, which follows stints at Russell Investments and Commerce Bank Securities in London. Apart from all this financial stuff, he has a keen interest and involvement in the affairs of the Trust and occasionally writes on politics and foreign affairs. In conclusion, I would say that we remember Professor Sondhi not simply because he was a brilliant, inspiring teacher and orator, a spirited and compassionate public servant, but because he was a visionary with perceptions about foreign affairs way ahead of his time. Seeing ahead of one's contemporaries is actually career-wise a grave disadvantage. But undeterred, he pursued his insights and vision with passion in Parliament, in the party, the street, or the classroom. He had the satisfaction of seeing the collapse of communism, which he had predicted at least 30 years earlier, and India's opening towards Southeast and Far East Asia. He also spoke of her attention to trade and security in the oceanic environment, normalization of relations with Israel, etc., all of which he's been advocating since the 60s. But a successful resolution to the Tibet conundrum eluded him, though it didn't deter him from pursuing it till the end of his life. He was always clear-sighted about the problems that China would present to India and the world, and argued for India to develop an adequate diplomatic cum strategic response, keeping in mind the key importance of Tibet. I would just like to add there is another important factor referred to as soft power, which is frequently stressed by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Despite the internal socio-philosophical arguments between the Vedantic and non-Vedantic and more popular Indian beliefs and practices, what came to be known as Buddhism was for several centuries very much part of this Indic field of ideational contention. I avoid the word religion as it's easily confused with Abrahamic beliefs and societies. Chinese scholars came to India to study Buddhism in the 5th and 7th centuries. They passed it on to Korea and Japan. And today, despite the religious persecution of the Maoist period, there may be, according to some estimates, almost 300 million practicing Buddhists in China, including perhaps 20 million followers of Tibetan Buddhism, not counting Buddhists inside Tibet. Tibetan Buddhism draws its lineage directly from India. Not only did some great Indian masters go to Tibet to teach the Dharma and insist in inventing a written script for translating Sanskrit texts, but many Tibetan seekers came here to study, and pilgrims continue to visit Buddhist sites till the Chinese takeover of their homeland. Interestingly, post-Mao, several Chinese Buddhists of all denominations are showing an interest in His Holiness. Inside Tibet, Buddhism often acts as a center of resistance to integration with the mainland, which Chinese ideology and suppression has failed to overcome. We've all heard of the more than 150 fiery protest suicides in Tibet. China has been more successful with Han demographic inundation, strategic infrastructure development, and exploitation of Tibet's mineral and water resources. However, I believe that ideas are also an important aspect of the China-Tibetan and Indian imbroglio. We define ourselves as a secular democracy and hope that one day China will also loosen her tight controls over society, thought, and action. But at the same time, India herself could take a serious relook at Buddhism, specifically Mahayana Buddhism. The Chinese authorities are simultaneously anti-religion and desirous of controlling organized religion. As late as 2016, they were demolishing Larungar, a monastic teaching institution with perhaps 10,000 residents, both Tibetan and Chinese. But at the same time, they seek to exercise bureaucratic control over selection of incarnate lamas inside and outside China. Dr. Sangay has often commented on how the exile community has recreated the Nalanda tradition in India. But in this project, India has essentially been a bystander. I think there is an opportunity or even a responsibility for India as the land of the Buddha to actively re-establish herself as the center of Mahayana Nalanda tradition, which would connect her to millions of Chinese citizens and undergird her Look East policy, and support the Tibetan people in the preservation and evolution of an important part of our collective heritage. A tentative step in that direction has already been taken with the recreation of Nalanda University, and we look forward to its evolution. With these words, may I now call upon our chairman of the evening, Sri Lalit Mansingh, to give his exordial remarks. Thank you.
Srimati Madhuri Sondhi ji, the Honorable Sikyong, Dr. Lebsang Sangay, Dr. Vivek Sondhi, distinguished guests. Professor Sondhi was the topper of the All India Civil Service exams of his year and opted to join the Foreign Service. But he had a very short stint in the IFS. He left the service by the time I joined, but I feel privileged that I had the occasion to know him, have extended discussions with him, and had an opportunity to probe his brilliant mind. Professor Sondhi left diplomacy, but diplomacy never left him. So when I read his speeches and his writings today, I am convinced more than ever that he was a strategic thinker of the highest order. A pity that his thinking was way ahead of the times and was against the conventional wisdom prevailing in India at that time. But now, as we go through his writings, we know how prescient he was in his analysis and his predictions. Professor Sondhi was a diplomat with a difference. The great guru of diplomacy, Count Talleyrand, of the former French foreign minister of the 19th century, had famously given advice to young diplomats. And he had said, and correct my French, Kamal, surtout ne pas trop d'enthousiasme. That means, above all, don't show too much of enthusiasm. This is one dictum that Professor Sondhi never followed. If at all, he pursued his core beliefs with great passion. And his greatest passion was Sino-Indian relations and the issue of Tibet. Tibet was the core of the relationship between India and China. And in his mind, as Mrs. Sondhi pointed out, Tibet is the heart of Asia. And as long as Tibet remains militarized, India can never feel safe. Had Pandit Nehru not ignored the advice of his colleagues like Sardar Patel, and had he supported Tibet's integrity and freedom, the boundary dispute with China may not have come to haunt us. Alas, that has come to pass. One of Professor Sondhi's last publications was a booklet called India, Tibet and China, published sometime around 2003. It gives an account of his differences on foreign policy issues with a succession of prime ministers, starting with Pandit Nehru, with Rajiv Gandhi, with P.V. Narasimha Rao, V.P. Singh, and I.K. Gujral. What I found intriguing in that book was Professor Sondhi describing His Holiness the Dalai Lama as a master of strategic thought, an epithet normally not associated with one of the greatest spiritual personalities of our times. In fact, Professor Sondhi puts him in the category of von Clausewitz, who, as you know, is the great icon of the realpolitik school. So, what Professor Sondhi concluded was that His Holiness's Buddhist middle way principle was actually the most brilliant strategy with which you can tackle China. And that's an issue which we need to ponder over, because as Mrs. Sondhi said, it's an issue of soft power versus hard power. And this is a subject of perennial discourse in diplomatic discussions. Most professional diplomats opt for hard power, that is military and economic power, and somehow downgrade the influence of moral authority. Now, yesterday at a function, and many of you were there yesterday, I had an interesting exchange with one of the distinguished guests who had come there, our Law and Justice Minister, Shri Ravi Shankar Prasad. And we were somehow discussing the Kalinga War of the 3rd century BC. Because it was the Kalinga foundation, somehow the issue of Kalinga came up. And I pointed out that even though according to history, King Ashoka came with a powerful and ruthless army and crushed the Kalingas and destroyed Kalinga, I said, in spite of that, the verdict of history will be that it was Ashoka who was defeated, not Kalinga. And why is it so? Because, as I said, Ashoka came from Magadh as the emperor of Magadh as Chanda Ashoka. and he returned from Kalinga as Dharmashoka. And that was a turning point of India's history. So, which is superior, the brute military and economic force or moral authority? Interestingly, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in the same vein, gave an interview which was published a few days ago in the Indian papers, in which he said that Tibet could ultimately control China through Buddhism. Sounds pretty incredible. How can Tibet control China? But people also were disbelieving when Mahatma Gandhi said, "We're going to defeat the British Empire, the mightiest empire in the history of the world, with non-violence." And so Gandhiji did. Destroy the British Empire and defeat it with a weapon nothing more than his walking stick. That is the force. That is the moral force that guides the world. So I think eventually Mahatma Gandhi and His Holiness the Dalai Lama must be acknowledged as some of the most brilliant strategic thinkers of their times, even though it goes against the conventional wisdom. Frankly, as a professional diplomat, I am convinced that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is India's most powerful deterrent against China. And it's a deterrent which I think has more explosive power than our entire nuclear arsenal combined together. As long as His Holiness is in India and with India, India is safe against China. So just as the Buddha came from across the mountains and spent his life in India, we in this generation are blessed that His Holiness has come from across the mountains to spend his life with us. And I'm sure you'll join me in praying for his long life, for strength, and for eventually seeing Tibet liberated in his lifetime. Thank you.
May I ask Ambassador to now address us?
Respected M.L.Sondhi ji, my dear friend Sikyong, Lebsang Sangay, all the trustees of the foundation, the most distinguished audience present in front of me, dear friends. I primarily agreed to come to this event because of my great respect for Prof M.L.Sondhi ji. I have never met him, but I used to read his writings, some of the compilations he had done in his lifetime. I regard him as one of the great scholars of India's diplomacy and foreign policy, and one who belonged to the school of thought to which I also belong. And also generally my respect for Madam Mathuri ji, who is continuing to carry that mantle after his demise. Otherwise, for a practicing politician of the ruling party like me, T-word is not allowed. Probably one of the reasons why I was asked to come and participate in this program was that I had authored a book on the India-China relations, but that was before I joined the party. I had the luxury of being frank, open, and candid. But once you are in politics and once you are a member of the ruling party, you have to tread the path very cautiously. Friends, I firmly believe that this question that we are trying to address today should have been addressed 5-6 decades ago. Trying to address it after 6 decades with a view of what happened 6 decades ago can create problems to us. India and China, what was the kind of relationship they had at the time of what all happened to Tibet? And what has happened in the last 5 decades between the two countries, which has had its own bearing on the question of Tibet also. So these things need to be taken into account. Historically speaking, great injustices have been done. We were a part of those injustices. We cannot claim that we have not done anything. In fact, we should agree that we have not done anything at that time, which we should have done. One biggest problem that I see in this relationship between India and China is that while we are two big old civilizations, we are culturally very different. Without proper appreciation of the cultural roots, cultural moorings of each of our civilizations and societies, you or we cannot find any solution to any of these problems, not just Tibet alone. Even the problem of Doklam, as late as Doklam. Challenge is we look at this relationship from a particular perspective, which is a product of our own cultural upbringing. The other side has a totally different cultural outlook. One of the major challenges for us probably is to develop a proper strategic culture in this country. I used to think that we don't have one, especially after the independence. That was only based on my understanding or my reading and experience of based knowledge of our international relations. I used to think that we don't have that strategic culture in our country. But in the last 3.5 years, I got convinced about it. I was reading Mohan Malik's book on India-China relations. He talks about this aspect of lack of strategic culture in our country. They have built that great China wall. I don't know how many kilometers long it is. Some say it is about 4,000 kilometers long. It took about 1,700 years to complete that great China wall. Many of you might have seen it. I had the opportunity to see it. A very strong, sturdy structure they built just to protect China from the northern invaders. And Mohan Malik raises this question. India historically had faced aggressions from its northwestern borders through one mountain pass called Khyber Pass. Why did it not occur to any Indian king that if I just simply build a wall there, close that pass, there won't be any aggressions on India? this is where that important question of strategic thinking comes in. I have read the Chinese history a little bit. I have read about Sun Tzu. There was a reference in my introduction. I mentioned it in my book also. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu makes a very important statement that the art of war is an art in deception. Deception is at the core of any war that you engage in. Now, we have a history in which we have had our own wars. The greatest war that we can talk about in our Indian history is the Mahabharata war. The very first statement in Mahabharata war is Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre. The statement begins here in the battleground is that this is a battleground, but it's a battle which has to be fought on dharmic principles. It has to be Dharma Kshetra. The whole concept of war in one culture is deception. In another culture is dharmic. It has to be righteous war. So much difference exists in the thinking itself, at the core cultural belief systems itself. So unless we understand the other side, their thinking, I'm afraid we cannot really find any lasting solutions to problems. We can still try and find temporary solutions to problems. China is our neighbor. You cannot choose your neighbors. But India's history is very peculiar. We have chosen our neighbors. We have picked up our neighbors. We have created neighbors where they didn't exist. Pakistan is our own creation. Most difficult neighbor. China, historically, was definitely in our neighborhood, but you cannot say that it was our neighbor in terms of sharing borders and all in between. We used to have Tibet as an independent kingdom. Just as we have allowed Pakistan to rise and become a neighbor, a most difficult neighbor, in 1947, by late 50s, we have allowed China also to become a neighbor. So this saying that you cannot choose your neighbors, probably that is true, but you can create neighbors, which we have done. Now, having created neighbors, we also should have learned to live with them. The unfortunate history of last 5 decades suggests that probably we have not learned to live with them. For you to learn with your neighbor, you should know who he is. You know, I remember in 62, when Mao decided to issue orders to his army sometime in August 62 for launching the war, Zhou Enlai asks him, "Sir, please think once again, because we have signed that Panchsheel agreement with Nehru, which talked about peaceful coexistence of our two countries, besides many other things." Mao winks and asks Zhou Enlai to convey to Nehru that what India and China should practice is not peaceful coexistence, but armed coexistence. Until then, we were in the belief that we probably have to lead a peaceful life together. So much so that we didn't ask for any support weapons from any other country. What was worse was that when countries came forward to offer the support, we didn't know what to ask from them. And finally, when we are almost into the war, India sends a list to USA And historians tell us that this list had to be rewritten by the Americans. It was so clumsy, the list was, that they had to redo it in order to understand what actually is the requirement in India. So somehow we have a problem that we have never bothered to understand our neighbor properly. We are a romantic nation, and our foreign policy is also driven largely by romantic ideas. Since I am a member of the ruling party, I cannot say much about it, but I am a firm believer that romanticism should end. It has to be a pragmatic policy. Talking about pragmatic policy, that brings me to the question of Tibet. It has to be approached today in a very pragmatic way. Right or wrong, as a nation, we have given commitments to China about its status. The last time that we gave a commitment was in 2003. Again, at that time, it was a BJP-led government under Prime Minister Vajpayee. People had different opinions about it. But nations have to honor the commitments that they give to the neighbors, to the other countries. I always believed that the path chosen by His Holiness of engaging with the Chinese leadership, trying to find some kind of a meaningful, mutually acceptable and beneficial settlement to this issue of Tibet is the best available option today. I'm sure the Tibetan leadership under Lebsang will agree with this, that the path of negotiations should continue. How to engage with China, they know better, because they have been doing it for at least 6 centuries now. There are difficulties, there are intricacies, but I am sure the Tibetan leadership understands it well. As far as we are concerned, as a government, in the last 3.5 years, we have been trying to better our bilateral relations with China. Until the advent of this millennium, until the end of last century, the obsession of the common man in India used to be India-Pakistan. Pakistan used to be the obsession. No longer. The obsession today is China. Everybody talks about China. Maintaining good relations with an important neighbor like China is definitely a matter of priority for Government of India. I see a hope in this relationship for one important reason, that we have 2 heads of state, President Xi Jinping in China and Prime Minister Modi in India, who are both very strong leaders with firm commitments. Fortunately, both enjoy personal goodwill, good rapport. After the latest party congress, everybody gives us to a feeling that President Xi has emerged much more stronger after the last party congress. So a strong leadership in both the countries should help in strengthening the bilateral relations, strengthening the mutual understanding, but also in the process help in addressing several issues. That includes the border dispute between the 2 countries and the question of Tibetans living in India, more than 100,000 of them. The day they arrived in India, we gave a solemn commitment that they will be our guests. They continue to be our honored guests. We treat them with utmost love and respect. A community committed to peace, committed to Buddhist ideals. We have great respect for the Tibetans living in India. Government of India is extending all support, whatever is possible, for managing the affairs of the Tibetan people here. But as we gave that commitment, the Tibetan side also has given a commitment to India that they will remain peaceful, law-abiding citizens here, which they continue to do here. And the efforts that the Tibetan leadership is making in finding a suitable solution to this crisis, this not exactly crisis, this question of future of Tibet, wherever it is required. Although at the moment it is between the Tibetan administration, CTA and the Chinese leadership, but wherever it is required, I'm sure the Indian people, Indian nation will stand by them. With these few words, I thank Madam Sondhi for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. And I thank all of you. I'm sure you would have understood my constraints. Thank you.
Let me invite Mr. Lebsang Sangay to give us the third M.L.Sondhi Memorial Lecture today.
Madam Sondhi ji and M.L.Sondhi ji, and very eloquent speaker Lalit Man Singh ji, and obviously very knowledgeable and courageous and principled stand leader Ram Madhav ji, for coming here despite all the constraints from the ruling party. I remember His Holiness Dalai Lama, when he met Atal Bihari Vajpayee, when he was the ruling party, he said, I wish you were in the opposition party because you spoke more eloquently about Tibet than being in the ruling party. So to someone from the ruling party to come and speak on the issue, of very sensitive issue about the 3T, Tibet, Tiananmen, and Taiwan, is very courageous. I appreciate that. As you can see, I'm sweating a bit. I'm under a bit of a cloud because just 2 days ago I spoke in New York in front of the United Nations to 5,000 Tibetans and friends. So it was -degree, and then the environment was not so to the temper of a rally. And then each speaker was going on speaking, and they could not raise the temper of the rally. So then, as a Sikyong of CTA who follows ahimsa, nonviolence, and dialogue in His Holiness Dalai Lama, I am not supposed to increase the temperature. I'm supposed to tone down the temperature, but the temperature was so cold and rally's environment was much colder. I just felt I have to bring out my Tibetan youth activist days and speak forcefully and loudly. I spoke so loudly that I lost my voice and I got sore throat. So, and then this morning, as I was going through the topic, it says Tibet holds the key to Beijing. I was puzzled with this topic. Suddenly I realized that Professor M.L.Sondhi had written an article about it. And I was reading it, Madam Sondhi has sent a suggestion that I should talk about my trip to Australia, New Zealand, and Nordic countries and how it relates to Tibet and China. So as it is, I'm under cloud, fever is high, cold, mix all that direction and suggestions. Now I got a little lost. And then my wife told me to eat good momo and drink lots of chicken soup. I had so much that I'm sweating now. So I took off my sweater, as you might have noticed. But this issue is very important, and two of the eloquent speakers have made their case very, very clearly. Then I will try to combine all this and more if my fever and cold can hold. The Tibet holds the key to Beijing. How is it so? I think perhaps we should start with the recent development in China. And that answers many of the questions, and particularly what, I would say prophetic Professor M.L.Sondhi wrote about Tibet on, India-China relationship. In the recent 19th plenum, Xi Jinping, in his 3 hours, 25 minutes speech, essentially he said, socialism with Chinese characteristic, a new era. That will be the mantra. So what is socialism with Chinese characteristic? Essentially, no liberal democracy, no freedom of speech, no rule of law, essentially one-party rule. Now, what is the new era? New era is the international frontier. Because the Mao Zedong era, we all know, is the unification of China. Deng Xiaoping era is to make China rich. They have made rich. Now the new era, the Xi Jinping era, is to take that socialism with Chinese characteristic to the international frontier. Hence, I've been conveying this message to all the capitals that I traveled to. I said, whether you like it or not, we all have only one choice. There are no choices. Either you transform China into liberal democracy or a Buddhist-based democracy, or China transform you. There is no choice. They are coming. That's their mantra. At least Deng Xiaoping had the decency to say that, oh, democracy will come in China in 50 years. Wen Jiabao had the decency to say that democracy is inevitable. Now Xi Jinping is saying no democracy. Socialism with Chinese characteristic. So it's coming to India, it's coming to all the neighboring countries. Hence, when I went to Denmark, they said, no, it's not coming to Denmark. Denmark will always be democratic. Norway said the same thing, Sweden said the same thing, Australia said the same thing. I proved them wrong, and this is how. Denmark spoke very strongly about human rights in China and Tibet in 1998, unilaterally, in Geneva. They were singled out and punished in the sense they were isolated, relationship were cut off, until 2008. And 2008, they made a deal. So in Denmark, there's a document called, it's very interesting, verbal note. It said verbally, but there is a note. Essentially, the Chinese government said verbally, the Danish foreign minister took a note of it. In English, it's never translated in Danish, never shown in Danish, never published in Danish. And then that document was shown, and the government accepted and called all the opposition leaders related to foreign policy in one room and said, this is what we have to agree if you want to normalize relationship with Beijing. They all read, now English is not the first language, now they have read in English. Okay. So they read it, and most of them found it, okay, it's acceptable because it talks about how great China was and how Denmark great was and what kind of relationship they had. We should continue the relationship. It looked all exotic and good. Except for one statesman, a very sharp guy, Mr. Sorensen. He noted and said, this one line, everything is all right. It's about how Danish food is good, Chinese food is good, and everything all right. And then there's one line which says that we oppose the independence of Tibet. So why do we have to write that line? Can't we take this out? And then the foreign minister said, that's the only line we cannot take out. Rest you can amend. And then they all thought, what the heck is one line? It's just one piece of paper. You sign it, and then we'll normalize a relationship. And they signed it. Now, since 2008, what happened? Because they signed it, we opposed independence of Tibet. It was never interpreted to Beijing, to Denmark, what it means. Now, each time Tibet issue was raised, interpretation expanded. First, monarch of Denmark or the prime minister of Denmark cannot meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Okay, tick. Next time, foreign minister cannot meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Next time, speaker cannot host His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Next time, even if His Holiness is hosted in the parliament, it has to go through the back door. And recently, the Danish delegation, member of parliament delegation, went to Beijing as a member of a high-level delegation. At the end, a mid-level bureaucrat, Chinese bureaucrat, wagged his finger and told them, Sikyong is coming. I was coming to Denmark. You dare not meet him. Why? You opposed independence of Tibet. They felt humiliated. And they said, we are going to meet with you and we will take a photograph, we'll put it on our Facebook. Because this is not what we signed. We just thought it's one line. We never thought all these things will follow. Then I went to Norway, Oslo. Same story. In Oslo, the Nobel Peace Committee gave Nobel Peace Prize to Liu Xiaobo, the Chinese Nobel Peace Laureate. And then Tundra, frozen relationship. And then there was a lot of debate. 3 years ago I went there. There was a lot of debate. We should renew or normalize our relationship with China because why? We can sell more salmon to China because Norway doesn't need any money. Okay, they have 5 to 10% trade surplus every year. The budget surplus every year. They have oil. Their foreign reserve is more than $1 trillion. They don't need any Chinese money. But they want to normalize relationship with China because I said, why? We want to be back in the game, and game is Beijing. I said, what do you mean back in the game? What do you think you will gain by you're having your office in Beijing? Oh, we will have a presence. I mean, the whole thing has flipped. To have an office in Beijing is a prestige issue. And so you are compromising your principle by doing that. And Norway went to the extent, can you imagine, to the extent that when Liu Xiaobo was released recently, he has terminal cancer. He was dying. And it was German doctors who said, we will take him to Germany and provide medical treatment. Norwegian Prime Minister didn't say a word because she was on vacation. I mean, Norway, essentially Nobel Peace Committee, gave the Nobel Peace Prize to him. And he's terminally ill. There's no ownership. Of course, Nobel Peace Committee issued a statement, but Norwegian government was silent. And I raised this issue in Norway. I said, the next time when a Nobel Peace Laureate gets the prize, he will come and take the prize and take $1 million, but the back of his mind or her mind will say, when push comes to shove, Norway will not be there. But I'll take the prize and the money and leave. I said, why are you compromising your principles and values? Because why? China had made them sign a document, another document, where it says Norway will respect core issues of China. What are the core issues? Not defined. Now we know what are the core issues. Tibet, Prime Minister. Now core issues includes also now Taiwan and Tiananmen. Denmark said only Tibet. Norway has some core issues. So then and when I went to Sweden, they said we are yet to sign a free trade agreement, hence we have not signed these conditions. And I said it's coming. Either you transform China or China is transforming you. They said, no, they will be never be able to transform us. I said, you're already transforming. You have given concession on Tibet, you have given concession on Taiwan, you have given concession on Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, then it will be expanded to human rights, environmental rights, all other issues. So hence India also, it's a reality. China is coming, it has come all the way to Doklam. It has already come to Nepal. We know just had election recently. Nepal is the only Hindu country in the world. It has no pro-China government there. And I went to Australia. Same thing. Interesting thing about Australia is that 3 years ago, I was there. The debate in Australia was, at least in the media, was whether the then foreign minister would meet with me or not. It was the debate. And I said, well, if he wants to meet, I will meet, but I have no objection. But media speculation, that was the question I was asked. So when I entered the building of Australian Parliament, I took the elevator. Up the floor I went, door opened, who entered? The Foreign Minister of Australia. I thought that was a karmic meeting. Formally it was not happening, but here he comes. Then deliberately I didn't shake his hand. That will be shaking a hand. Obviously, as a Tibetan, I will say it's shaking a hand with a peaceful guy, but it could be shaking a hand with the devils, in terms of major concessions. This time when I went to Australia, what has happened to the Australian foreign minister? He has become the highest paid consultant to the Chinese government. Now, the trade minister of Australia also. Again, there was a controversial deal. He signed it. Now he's become the director of the trade deal. So this is what you see happening everywhere. You go. That they make a concession on business everywhere. Now Australia has this movie called Four Corners. It's a documentary produced by ABC Australian Television. If you watch that, you will see the influence of Chinese government in Australia. It has penetrated everything. It's not just business. It's not just academia. It's not just politics. Everywhere. Now there's this issue that Chinese businessmen are being huge tract of land. and all the provincial government are competing to get Chinese business. Now soon they realized that they have bought huge tract of land to grow products like vegetables or animal meat, all kinds. Then suddenly they realized that all the transportation, all the cold storage, where you put all the food, is also bought by Chinese. And all the local transportation are also bought by Chinese company. And the export from Australia to China, all the ship and the export is also bought by Chinese. They have hired best lawyers, best accountant, and they have paid consultants in the form of former ministers. And the whole chain. And the Australian provinces are nervous as to what is happening. And then in academia, can you imagine Western countries take pride in saying academic freedom, objectivity of the academic freedom, intellectual space is very, very important, very sacred. It's constitutionally guaranteed. Now in Australian university, a professor of Indian descent mentioned Taiwan in the class. Chinese students objected and complained to the university. What did university do? University fired the professor. Why? For Australia, education is the third highest source of income. And the largest number of foreign students are Chinese. Now, instead of Chinese students transforming their mind, learning from Western culture, Australian culture or Norwegian culture, American culture, they are influencing the academia of the West. Now we know, as well-known print publications, many publications, major publications have stopped publishing articles on Tibet, Tiananmen, all sensitive issues. They're self-censoring themselves. So you can clearly see the world is transforming more like China than we all are trying to transform China. So hence we have no choice. India has no choice. And in this context, as I said, Professor M.L.Sondhi was prophetic. From the very beginning, he said Tibet is the core issue between India and China relationship. Had India taken a stand in 1950s and 60s, even the Ram Madhavji said, what happened 60 years cannot be addressed now, but had India and all the neighboring countries taken a stand on Tibet, China could have, if not been pushed back, could have paused. No one took a stand and let China come to the border of India. Now we have 3,500 kilometers long border, which never existed between India and Tibet. Now it's India and China, all the border areas, right here. Now they're in Doklam, they're entering Doklam. They're entering Nepal, they're entering Bangladesh, they're entering everywhere because we let them come to Tibet. And for decades, M.L.Sondhi ji has said, even now they have entered. Least India could do is declare Tibet as a zone of peace. Let us restore its status as a buffer zone. At least denuclearize Tibet. De-arm Tibetan region. And no one spoke. No one came out in support of Professor M.L.Sondhi. At least if those agreements were done, at least those conditions were put there on the table. But you have occupied Tibet, we accept that, but it has to be a zone of peace, it has to be a buffer zone, there should be no nuclear warmth, there should be no arms. Then 1,800 Chinese troops won't be standing in Doklam as we speak today. They have just declared that they will sit through even the winter. They would not even come to Nepal. So hence Tibet is the litmus test. And hence Tibet holds the key to Beijing. In that sense, it's right. Everywhere. If you are for human rights, if you are for democracy, if you are for justice, if you are for ahimsa, if you are for non-violence, if you are for dialogue, you ought to support the issue of Tibet. If you don't support, that's what I said in front of the UN, that's what I say everywhere. If you don't support, you are not only not supporting Tibet, you are in fact opposing ahimsa, you're opposing non-violence, you're opposing dialogue, you're opposing human rights, you're opposing democracy. Because there's no choice. China is coming and it's penetrating every aspect of your society. So hence, it's not too late. Hence, Tibet could be the catalyst to bring changes inside China as well. And if you want to bring changes inside China, which horse or which lion you want to ride? I think it's the Tibetan one. That's what Professor M.L.Sondhi has said all along. India should also declare Tibet as one of the core issues like China declares. And it should be on the table when you have any dialogue on India-China relationship. Unless you put it on the table, it's not an issue. And then you can address the issue of Tibet. Now, recently, the Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh and the whole of Assam is nervous because suddenly this dark, thick, cement-like water, liquid is flowing through the Brahmaputra River, and in many suspects, a major construction is going on to divert the Brahmaputra River towards other parts of China. And it's receding every year. And Tibet is the water tower of Asia. 10 major rivers of Asia, Indus, Satluj, Brahmaputra, Yangtze, Yellow, Irrawaddy, Mekong, all flow from Tibet. Ramu River to Nepal, all flow from Tibet. 1.4 billion people of Asia depend on water flowing from Tibet. Now, if you let China utilize, they can say we have sovereign control over Tibet, and we can use our water any way we want, and we can divert it any way we want because we have not signed. We have even not signed the UN Convention on Water Sharing. What can India do? But if you say Tibet as a buffer zone, as a zone of peace, Tibetan as the guardian of the Tibetan plateau should have some say on how the Tibetan plateau is administered, how the water is shared or not. Ultimately, Tibetans should have a say on this as well. Because, and in India also, if you want to build something in a village, you consult the villagers, even though the project might be beneficial to villagers, you consult the villagers and say, what is your take on this? Do you oppose or not? And with their consent, with their support, you implement the project. Similarly, Water Tower of Asia, that's where Tibetan people live. And Tibetans must have a say on how you function or administer the Tibetan plateau. Hence, restoring the stewardship or the guardianship of the Tibetan plateau to the Tibetan people is also very important. And if you do that, then there will be some semblance of sanity. Otherwise, at the moment, it's one way. The Beijing to Delhi, Beijing to Lhasa. And finally, I'll end with one belt, one road. Is the biggest thing that's going on. We have been a witness to that because we lost our country because of one road. So whenever one belt, one road is mentioned, we are terrified. All the nightmares comes back. Because the Chinese army, Red Army, promises one road. They said it would bring peace and prosperity. And the Tibetans helped them build road. As Ram Motherji rightly said, their strategy has always been deception. So they said, we will build this road, it will bring peace and prosperity to Tibet and Tibetan people. And our parents and grandparents were so happy to build roads, they were paid silver coins. And Tibetans composed a song called Chinese communists are like our parents. When they come, they shower you with silver coins. And Mao Zedong and Chinese government directed that silver coin factories be built near Chengdu. They literally built several factories to manufacture silver coins to supply to Tibet because they knew it will come back. Pay. And Tibetans built the road. Once the road was completed, trucks came, tanks came, guns came, we got our country occupied. By the time we realized that some of the ruling elite was co-opted. Now it's called consultant, right, to ministers who are paid. We didn't know some of a few aristocrats have also become consultant to Communist Party because they were paid golds. Gold coins were paid to them. And there were entertainment centers were built. So I was giving a talk in Mysore University, and 2 African students asked me, what do you make of all the Chinese investment in the continent? And I said, did they build good roads? They said yes. Did they build big entertainment centers? They said yes. Did they co-opt your leaders? They said yes. They said, how do you know about Africa? I said, it happened to us 60 years ago. Same blueprint is used even today. And it's working. So in that sense, Tibet is the key to unravel the deception, the strategy, and the execution. In that sense, Tibet could be the catalyst to push back on China. Hence, M.L.Sondhi's prophetic stand that Tibet should be the core issue between India and China is right. And rightfully so. Now let me end with this. 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries were destroyed in Tibet in 1950s and 60s. 99.9% of monks and nuns were disrobed in Tibet. Mao Zedong thought, we have destroyed the foundation of Tibetan civilization. Tibet looks like China. Tibet looks like Chinese. Done deal. But after 60 years, what happened? Buddhism is back in Tibet. Buddhism is back in exile. Buddhism is back in Himalayan region. Buddhism has spread because of His Holiness Dalai Lama to all the Western countries, and China has become oddly the largest Buddhist country in the world. 300 million Chinese Buddhists. Hence, Chinese leaders are a bit nervous about His Holiness returning to China because he will have more members, 300 million members, than 82 million Communist Party members. So hence, Tibet could be a catalyst. Buddhism could be a catalyst. Because when you have 300 million members, well, you have more members than Communist Party of China. So let me conclude by saying this. So, China, again, China is trying to transform the world. Either we transform China or you get transformed. But there is an opportunity. China is not this linear the linear progression, a one-way street coming all the way. A lot of things are happening inside China also. China is historically, traditionally a Confucius country. Then they adopted Marxism. Then they adopted market economy. Now Christianity is there. Buddhism is there. So meaning the Confucian guy is there. Karl Marx is there in one room, same room. Adam Smith is there. And Jesus Christ is also there. And Buddha is also there. This is China. They are talking about each other. What to do. Which direction should China go? And Mr. Buddha is saying, hey, I have 300 million members, so I must have a final say. So if Mr. Buddha have a say, he will invite Miss Democracy to China. And if China becomes a Buddhist-based democracy, that's Dalai Lama's version of Buddhist-based democracy, which everybody accepts is more inclusive, more benign, more gentle. If that happens to China, and peace will prevail in China, in Tibet, and the whole of Asia and the whole world. So we should not, I think the choice is very clear. Should we transform China or not? And we can. There are forces within China. That's happening. That's changing China. All we need to do is, instead of having Denmark and Norway unilateral stand on China, there must be a multilateral coordinated stand on China. India and allies should stand together on China and take it to the United Nations. That's what M.L.Sondhi said. Take it to international forum and make Tibet as the linchpin of this issue, of this pushback. And if you do that, then suddenly Tibet holds the key to Beijing in changing Beijing as well. And so far, and it has been other way around, and I hope there's, instead of one-way street, there's another way going back to Beijing, and Tibet will be the lion that we all will ride and challenge the dragon. Thank you. Oh, I was told if there are some questions to any of the panelists, including me, I'm supposed to answer. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I was. As I told you,
in 1950, when the People's Liberation Army occupied Tibet, there has been a lot of discussion in India among intellectuals and various groups that Prime Minister Nehru was misled by his own envoy in Beijing, Sardar K.M. Panikkar, author of 2 volumes of Asia and Western Dominance, for whom Asia versus the West was more important than any intra-Asia conflict. And that, apart from the fact that Nehru also had a socialist streak in him, and he had a communist as his defense minister. So all that led to the recognition, which was not necessary. The de facto occupation was okay, but it did not have to be a de jure recognition. But what Nehru did was that he compounded his error of this recognition by keeping the Dalai Lama in India. He should have facilitated the transit of the Dalai Lama from India to a neutral country in Europe or some Buddhist country not having border with China. And because of the stay in India, the Dalai Lama's mouth was shut. In fact, recently a new book has come out by Bertil Linter, a Swedish journalist, in which he said that the Chinese started preparing an attack on India in 1959 when the Dalai Lama came here. And this theory of Neville Maxwell that it was the forward policy of Nehru which led to 62 is totally wrong. And it's probably correct. What he's saying is true. That purpose of Mao Zedong in attacking India in 62 was to shut the mouth of Dalai Lama. That's why he quickly withdrew. But now, is it already too late? Now every time, out of pragmatism, Dalai Lama says, we are not seeking independence. He's giving a blow to the Tibetan cause. The cause is receding further. In fact, he should be in a place where, in the Sino-Indian relations are too sensitive for him to, now for example, if Chinese had a government in exile from
question, please, sir?
Several places, my question is that whether is India the right base for the Dalai Lama, and whether he should not look for a place from where he can speak freely for the freedom of Tibet and human rights in China.
I think if I answer your question, India is the right place. I think so. What India has done and the government and people has done to Tibetan people, no other country has done. That we wish more could have been done. And as I said, Tibet could be one of the core issues of India as well, like China says it is. That's what we all wish. But as a guest here, as a following Tibetan Buddhist diplomacy, again following His Holiness Dalai Lama's advice, we are always very grateful to this great country. Now, as far as the 1962 war, it's not just 1959. You can go back to 1954, the Panchshil Agreement. 1954 Panchshil Agreement was essentially a trade agreement between Tibet and British India. It all started in 1914. Similar convention on Tibet. It's not similar convention Pakistan. There's a more popular one. Similar convention on Tibet. With the similar convention, and there were other agreements. One was the McMahon line. The border was demarcated between the Tibetan Prime Minister Lungchen Shatra and Sir McMahon. Hence it's called McMahon line. So, and then the other one was the trade agreement between British India and Tibet in 1914. So it has to be renewed every 10 years. 1914, 24, 34, 44, it was renewed between Tibet and India. But in 1954, Pandit Nehru thought that it should be renewed with Beijing, and the delegation went to Beijing. After several months, they came back with Panchshil. So if you look at the body of that Panchshil, it's all about trade between Tibet and India. It's all land route and all. If only in the preamble the 5 points were included. So Nehru claimed the Panchshil is a Sanskrit term, it's ours. And then China said not so fast. They signed another Panchshil, Burma. Even the term Sanskrit term Panchshil has ownership of China at that time. Now when the Panchshil was signed, I think it was Indian proposal was to last it for 25 years. China said 5 years. In the end, they agreed to 8 years, for 8 years. So 1954, Panchshil was signed. After 5 years, what happened? Tibet was occupied in 1959. After 8 years, what happened? 1962 war happened. So one can say the 62 war was planned in 1954 when the Panchshil agreement was signed. So the very foundation and the claim of peaceful coexistence was based on deception with the intent to occupy Tibet and to declare war on India.
Please go ahead. If anyone has a question for any of the other speakers.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Anil Bhatt. Just very few brief observations. The Dalai Lama has been like a red rag to a bull for China. And anything and everything that India or any other country does to honor him is it causes severe allergy or indigestion too. But over the years, the way Tibetans came here, very interesting, you mentioned momos. Momos have beaten Chinese food.
Yes.
Momos, thukpa and chocho are now more preferred than Chinese food, and they're more accessible. And my suggestion to Sri Ram Madhavji is that Doklam is a landmark where we didn't blink. It holds the key for, and incidentally, why Doklam also marks 50 years of bulletless border management between India and China. In 1967, September, October, when India retaliated to the Chinese upping the ante, they lost about 400 Chinese PLA soldiers, a convoy of vehicles, and a whole lot of bunkers were leveled. I'm sure it is a message which went, which has prevented them from pulling the trigger, because we have had thousands of incursions, transgressions, all solved by dialogue. Grappling, wrestling, but eventually dialogue. Thank you.
Quickly on Doklam. Again, the Doklam also happened because of the occupation of Tibet. One can make that case. Because 1930s and 50s, the Chinese leaders, including Mao Zedong, have said that Tibet is the palm that they must occupy. Once the palm is occupied, they must extend to 5 fingers. That is Sikkim, Bhutan, Nepal, Ladakh, and Arunachal. So as I said, whether you transform China or China transform you, China is coming. They're coming to 5 fingers. They have already penetrated Nepal, and they want to penetrate all other 5 fingers. And Doklam is the test. It's not just pressure on Bhutan. It touches Sikkim and whole Nepali belt touching Nepal. So, they are coming up 5 fingers. Again, Professor Sondhi was right. Had we stopped at the palm, 5 fingers would not be included, because palm was allowed, they're coming to 5 fingers.
But we should make a beginning sometime.
As far as Doklam is concerned, the only main difference between the way we have handled such issues in the past and in case of Doklam was that here we deployed mature diplomacy together with strong ground posturing. That has won the day for us. But having said it, as I said, Doklam is not over.
And also, if you look at all the neighboring countries, from East China Sea, South China Sea, Chinese army, went about doing what they wanted to do. It's only in Doklam there was a pushback. So I think that's much noted by various capitals around the world as well.
Please.
I have
a question, please.
Before
There are other
question,
questions also.
2 or 3.
Oh, okay.
I have the privilege in this room of having known Manoharlal Sondhi for the longest period, because we were batchmates. So we knew each other from 1st of May 1956. I don't want to talk about, because everybody knows about Manoharlal. I knew him as a young man. One incident which I will mention in our association, which raises a question relevant to this and other issues. When I came here in a constitutional organization, a special commission for scheduled castes, in 1987, Sondhi told me about a boy called Madhuleti, scheduled caste, who has done well in written, but for his admission to PhD, he was given 0 marks in the interview. Where was he? So he came to me, and then I fought for him. He got his PhD admission, and then now he's a professor. My query arising from this is, if India is to stand up on either Tibet issue or many other issues are there between India and China, then India has to be united. But we have been spending all our energies in keeping down people where they are. Day before yesterday, a judgment was passed in Tamil Nadu, in Tirupur, giving death sentence to 6 people for killing a scheduled caste boy, for having the temerity to marry with consent a non-scheduled caste girl. There are 150 such cases in Tamil Nadu. And there are 1 lakh cases in Rajasthan where their lands they are trying to keep their lands, but one person was decimated under tractor. With this situation, this is a question which cannot be answered by Mr. Lebsang, but I think Indians have to think, Indian elite have to think, where do we stand if India has to be strong? Without strength, you can be very good seminarians, but you cannot face China. China is gloating over the fact that India cannot come out of its caste mousetrap. This is where we stand. So how do we get out of this and be able to stand up?
Mr. Ramadha, would you want to?
Through the strong willpower and through with the help of our existing laws, we should overcome this thing. And yeah, that's why I said willpower also. You have laws, but there are too many in-laws for every law. So we have to tackle the in-laws. I have one question or maybe one observation for you. Probably the audience will be benefited. Before that, sir, in the context of your observation, Holiness has opted to stay in India. It was not that nobody had facilitated him to go to another country, but he preferred to stay in India. Everybody knows that Chow En-lai and Nehru both tried to send him back, but he insisted that he would stay back in India. And he has great respect for this country, great reverence for India. That is also very well known. I mean, in private conversations, he would tell that, you know, I am an Indian by blood, meaning I have eaten the dal and roti and rice of this country, out of which the blood of my body is made. So I am an Indian by blood. So much reverence he has got. And our relationship is, as we all know, not merely political. It goes beyond that. Of course, as I said, we are with them in their fight for the solution. But once he narrated a very inspiring thing in one private conversation with me, and one or two others were there. Morarji Desai as Prime Minister went to call on him. And Morarji Bhai told him, generally, which we all do, that you know Hinduism and Buddhism, you Tibetan Buddhists and we Indians, are two branches of the same tree. The great Sanatana Dharma tree, we are the two branches of the same tree. And Holiness told us that I corrected Morarji Bhai. I told Morarji Bhai that Morarji Bhai, you are wrong. You are the tree and we are the branch. This is the kind of emotional integration that Holiness has with this land, this culture, and this identity. So I'm not disputing. Probably you could have, and this is hypothetical. Probably you would have been able to run it more successfully if he's not in India. This is all hypothetical situation. My simple question or probably observation to Sikyong is, from my own experience, I happened to be in Lhasa on an official visit. When you are in an official visit, you are always tailed by a protocol officer. So I was on an official visit. The Lhasa mayor hosted a dinner. 10 top officials of Lhasa state administration were invited. 8 of them were Han Chinese. So naturally I asked him, this is the Lhasa city mayor, city administration. How come I find so many non-Tibetans in the dinner table, on the dinner table? Mayor said, no, they are all Tibetans. They were all born here in Tibet. So they were Tibetans. So it's a Tibetan administration and they are all Tibetans. So how do we address it? I mean, one may say, you are an Indian, we are born here.
Notion
No.
and tactics are two different things.
No, I'm saying, how do we address this question of demography?
Very unlikely 8 of the 10 Chinese who were there in the mayor council would have been born in Tibet. Very unlikely, I think so. Now, later generation, there could be. Because that has been the ruling system of Chinese government in Tibet. This is the last data, I don't know the latest leadership structure, of the 13 standing committee of the Politburo of the local Tibet Autonomous Region, 13. Now, first of all, 7 are Chinese, full Chinese, so they're majority. The remaining 6 are half Chinese, married to Chinese, or they have Chinese daughter-in-law and son-in-law. There's only 1 or 2 Tibetan. the party secretary has always been Han Chinese and never been a Tibetan. So that's the most powerful person. And then that's how it goes. If you look at the police, the intelligence officer, the mayor, all the people who have power are Chinese. Now, demographically, it's true. Chinese desinization or assimilation of, not just Tibetan area, all other quote-unquote 55 minorities have been through demographically sending Chinese into the area. For example, Manchuria has 9 Chinese per every Manchurian. In Mongolia, I think the demography is almost 8 Chinese per 2 Mongolian. Because I think that's the fault of the Mongolian leader, Ma Fufang. He wanted a bigger land, and he included Chinese land in Mongolia. That's how it is. But in Xinjiang also, it's, I think, 60%, 40%. But in Tibet, fortunately, because of the altitude, in the lowland border areas, the majority are Chinese. In urban areas, Chinese are becoming majority, but only in summer. At this time of the winter, Chinese go back. So in winter, Tibet is Tibetan majority even. So we are not a big fan of global warming. We wish Al Gore very well, and with his inconvenient truth, we want global warming to wait. Because for Tibetans also, we used to live at the height of 3,000 plus meters high mountains only, because that's where wheat can grow, and wheat cannot withstand ice and snow. Hence, it cannot grow above 3,000 meters high. Just 3,000 years ago, we discovered barley, and with barley and yak, we went up 4,000 meters high. So we are a recent migrant to the plateau of Tibet, and the Chinese lowland people, for them to genetically adapt and to live in 4,000 meters high, it will take several centuries. So if there's election in winter, I think Tibetans will win. So we have to be strategic mindset. So I agree with you.
Yeah.
But it's only in summer they come.
If Mr. Sebul can take the next question, and then General Sehgal.
Yeah, I've been reading reports about His Holiness wanting to go to China. Apparently, Mr. Rinpoche was sent about 10, 15 days ago to China to perhaps prepare the ground for his visit. He made some statements a few days ago, reiterating that he's not seeking independence, etc., etc. And there is also apparently a thinking that Xi Jinping might be a little more flexible, especially after the 19th millennium. But are you getting any signals from the Chinese government? After all, we spent all our time saying how deceptive they are. So they obviously have a strategy in mind, and it's a strategy of deception. So what would be the kind of signals you are getting? What would be your calculation? Do you think that there can be any forward movement, real movement in re-establishing a dialogue? And what will be the conditions under which His Holiness could go there, and for how long, etc., etc.? Just a little clarity on this would be helpful, because it appears as if, and from the Western reports especially, that he's very keen to go back.
Tibetans are always very hopeful, So of course, Chinese use deception. That's also a fact, and we lost our country because of deception only, and it's also a fact. Now, we always say this: Xi Jinping in his second term could be more liberal, more open-minded. He will have the wisdom and will to solve the issue of Tibet. But at the same time, we also say the same thing when Jiang Zemin was in second term and Hu Jintao was in second term. And now it's too early to say what would Xi Jinping do in his second term. The only unique thing about Xi Jinping is that his father, Xi Dongshun, was very close to late Panchen Lama, and he was very familiar with the issue of Tibet. If you read the obituary of late Panchen Lama written by Xi Jinping's father, and he clearly says, and Xi Dongshun, the father, was the last person to see when Panchen Lama went to Tibet, and first person to see when he came back from Tibet. And Xi Dongshun, the father, was also very liberal in his orientation, hence he was the closest ally of Hu Yaobang, the most liberal leader of China. And hence, that's father. Now, whether father whether son will be like father or not is to be seen. But all the indications point out that he is opposite of his father at the moment. And on issue of Tibet also, what he will do is too early to say. Now, as far as my predecessor, Professor Samdurum's visit to Wutaishan Mountain of China, which was reported, I asked him, again, when you're in the government, there are constraints. Because we did not meet, because he was in Dharamsala, I was going to the US, and I called him, Samdurum, it's in the news, what should I say? He said, I have not officially reported to you, so you don't know. So you have to brief me officially, so I don't know the details. But it's out in the paper, yes. But I think we should not read too much. I think so. It was at most a private visit. So we should not, a private visit. So I think we should not read too much, and I think too early to say. Even after all the envoys delegation went to, China, they had 9 rounds of dialogue with the Chinese counterpart. Each time they went, there was speculation and the things will happen. And then after 9 rounds, we are back to square one. In fact, there was regression as far as the Tibetan movement internationally is concerned, because we restrained ourselves in the international front because of the dialogue that was going on. So there are a lot of analysis being done. I think it's too early to say, and we can't read too much into it. That's my assumption without having the official report.
Can General Sehgal have the next question? Then after.
You spoke a lot about Denmark in the beginning. When His Holiness came to Denmark in April 2011, I was Indian ambassador there. Previous visit, he had been met by many Danish leaders, although they all claimed that they were meeting him privately. In 2011 visit, he told me himself, His Holiness, nobody met him in public eye, and 4 members of parliament from different political parties came and met him in his hotel suite. And they did not enter the hotel from the main doors. They came from a side door quietly. Yes. So these pressures are working, all over. I have seen it myself.
Yes, I agree with you. And I told all the Nordic countries and all the various capitalists, suddenly when I meet government officials, by default, I have become the expert on deception of China, you see. So I said, Chinese strategy is like this. If you have a piece of paper, and in fact there's a saying, I'm sure there are some people in this room who knows this better, the Chinese strategy is like this. If you have a piece of paper, they say, we are friends, So you keep piece of paper to yourself. All I need is if I can put a drop of my oil, that belongs to me, but paper is yours. It's a while, a good friend, all I need to do is allow him and give him the ownership of drop of oil. So you sleep overnight, next day you realize the drop of oil is spread all over your paper, and he takes the whole paper because, that's the deal you have made. So similarly, Denmark said the same thing. We opposed independence rebellion. It's just one line. That's how, it's not a big deal. And then whole conditions followed. And then I'm talking, this one is not just Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland also, And now in Australia, what is happening is that there's a buyer's remorse, Just recently, the Australian Parliament introduced a bill called Foreign Influence, how we should restrict foreign influence. Clearly it was China, and China's foreign minister objected to that. And then, it was so interesting that one politician resigned recently. Why? Because the head of the political party criticized some aspect of trade deal with China, and this guy comes out and have a impromptu press conference, defying his political leader and criticizing his own party. Because why Chinese business called him and told him to go in front of the media and criticize the own party, own government. Because he simply criticized some aspect of trade deal. Now this politician just resigned. So there's a bias remorse going on in Australia, a lot of debate. And then you can clearly see, as I told you, how they move in. They are very strategic. If businessmen, they buy the farm, they buy the cold storage, local transportation, export, import, all done. So now they have just introduced the bill, and then they are, they are trying to rectify things. I don't know how far it will go. Hence, you need a multilateral, coordinated approach in dealing with China. If you do single-handedly, you will be crushed. For example, Canadian Prime Minister, right? The Chinese define the relationship with Canada as golden era. I mean, it's as gold and yellow as it can get. He went there, and I was there in Ottawa saying, you must put Tibet, you must put human rights. I said, you are going to have free trade deal with them. Don't give free pass on human rights. He said, they are not going to mention human rights. They are not going to mention Tibet. But they will mention women's rights. He's a big fan of women empowerment, right? Half his cabinet is women. And labor rights, because he's from the Liberal Party. So he went to China, he said, what about women's rights and labor rights? And then Xi Jinping just said, we need to have a political trust, no deal. Trust us. You don't need all this. You can't have free. So Canada did not get free trade, even though he was simply asking for women's rights and labor rights. So you can clearly see conditions working. But there's bias remorse happening in Africa and all the countries. If you coordinate, approach it together, and you can make a dent. And India can lead that path.
Ram Madhav, this point is for you especially. It's a short one, I'm not doing it quickly. This point is especially for you because I've mentioned it to Kalo Tripa, the Sikyong, and His Holiness. In 1959, when the Chinese went into Tibet, 3 countries had a locus standi to do something about it. The United States, United Kingdom, and India. For 50 years, when China moved in, became independent, whatever you call it, the United States was much stronger than China. They didn't make China budge. Then finally, due to trade, a few years ago, UK, the signatory of McMahon and all those conferences, signed away the last rights. They said suzerainty gives place to sovereignty. Today, the only country that has locus standi about Tibet is India. I think the government is playing its cards well, slowly but surely. A day will come through the party, through the government, when India declares that China, because of what he's done and what the threat is to India, military occupation of Tibet and nuclear and all that, we go back. China does not have sovereignty over Tibet. Now, it will electrify the world. Overnight, Denmark, Sweden, Australia, no. But India being the person that should be affected, when it says so, it's a sort of a mini atom bomb it will be throwing in the world. Keep it in mind, we've got to time it. Time is not yet, but time is on our side. Chinese are overplaying. When I met His Holiness through Kalo Tripa in 1999, June, I still remember, he gave me an audience. I told him, Your Holiness, I gave a 2-hour talk in the Kashag. Reverend Samdong Rinpoche will tell you what it was about. I just want to tell you one thing. China was conquered from the east. The reconquest of China can only take place from the east, and that is where India comes in and Buddhism comes in. Please keep it in mind because this is one trump card we have the Chinese can never ignore.
Yes. One last question.
One last question, then we'll stop.
Hypothetical question. I'm just asking what if His Holiness goes to Lhasa and from there spreads Buddhism over to the mainland China?
Yeah, I think His Holiness, I think the Ambassador Lalith Singh just said, China can be transformed through Buddhism.
That's why I said he should go to Lhasa.
Yes. If he goes to Lhasa, it's not that easy at the moment. Yes.
I just asked a hypothetical question. Should he go there and quicken the process of Buddhism in
Sure.
China? That's the question.
I think, maybe perhaps, Madhuriji, if we end it here. Now, I gave you all the Chinese influence and penetration and the impact it's having around the world. But there are some countries who are standing up. For example, Botswana. They said, we want to invite His Holiness Dalai Lama to Botswana. And Chinese government put lots of pressure on him. And finally, he said, Botswana is not a colony of China. I will do what I want to do. And His Holiness Dalai Lama is coming. So, now, India included, all the countries, Western countries, the big power has to follow the footsteps of Botswana and take a moral stand and be courageous. So there are countries who are standing up. So I think it's only a matter of time. Like Australia is having bias remotes, some other countries have bias, it will reverse. So coincidentally, even though there's a lot of restrictions, but there's also more interest on the issue of Tibet. So that's why I get platform. For example, when I spoke at the National Press Club of Canberra, in Australia, it was taped on TV, and it was shown hour-long, half an hour presentation, half an hour Q&A. It was shown twice, whole hour-long, in national ABC television. So suddenly and then I went to Mexico. First time when I went there, I could not fathom. I could not figure out how to connect Mexico to Tibet. How can I make Tibet issue relevant? I talk about environmental issues. Then the Newsweek, the Espanol, the owner and the editor came to interview me, and they said they want to interview, and they were considering the front page of Newsweek or not. And I give good interview. But unfortunately, what happened was, same day I arrived, the president of Mexico went to Beijing, shook hands with Xi Jinping, and signed I don't know how many dollars, the $1 billion trade. And then the day after I left, Mexico had the biggest earthquake of the century. Now you can't compete with Mexico president going to Beijing and the biggest earthquake of the century. In the end, what did Espanol Newsweek did? They went with my photograph as the front page. So to all the Spanish countries. So there are people, they are learning, they are interested about China, and they suddenly realize that unless you know the story of Tibet, the Tibetan narrative, the good, bad, and ugly side of it, you don't understand China. And hence there are platforms. So I just came from the DC and New York, and then I keep traveling. So suddenly you see there's a growing space where people are curious about China, and people want to do something about China. So hence, if we put our mind together and have a clear strategy, multilateral coordinated strategy, you can impact. And I do feel that China is they have proven that they're very good in trade. Their economy has grown exponentially in the last 2-3 decades. Now, One Belt, One Road essentially is to capture the raw materials of Eurasian countries and manufacture goods and sell it to the European market. That's their goal. So they are already investing, and they are already quite successful in advanced economy, right? Like the high-speed train, nuclear power plant, electric car, artificial intelligence. This is where they're investing. So they have a grand strategy and a grand plan, and they are implementing it with the One Belt, One Road. That's what they're trying to do. But I think the weakest link of China is also their foreign diplomacy. They use deception, they use sunju, but they don't have the finesse and the sophistication of what diplomacy should be. That's the weakest weakness, and they are coming. And one could take advantage and turn it around and transform China for the better of China. We are not talking of destruction of China or what do you call it, the disappearance or anything of China. We are talking about Buddhist-based democratic China. And what happens if Buddhist-based democratic China, like Tibetan Buddhist scriptures, we always start with Om Gyagara Ketu. If there's any Buddhist scripture, it starts with Om, homage to India. That's how we start. And the relationship between all the Buddhist countries and India will be based on that line. So India has marginal presence of Buddhists, but all the 14 Buddhist countries and 52 countries with Buddhist presence always look at India as the center of the Buddhist world. And they always start every scripture with paying homage to India and this great country.
On On behalf of M.L.Sondhi Trust, let me thank Lebsang Sangay for delivering the third M.L.Sondhi Memorial Lecture. Ram Madhavji is not here, but let me thank him also. Sri Lalitman Singh, who always is a source of guidance to us. And please join us for...
No, I will answer you after this. Because formally
and we'll have tea and coffee upstairs, so please ask directly. Thank you.
No, it's all right. I'm sweating a bit because it's quite stuffy. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Having very hectic schedule.
Thank you.
20th.
So good to meet you.
Yes. I must come to...